There were investment funds, there were developers, MMC providers, landlords, managing agents, London Council's Northern Housing Consortium, National Housing Federation, etc. There was a lot of energy in the room, and people just wanted to keep the dialogue growing. And since then, we've now got about over 450 members. And now we know from the TA challenge and everything else we do that we have to do it in collaboration and partnership. Not one single organization can deal with the problems. And the purpose of TAN really was to be a conduit of best practice, bringing together different parties that can play a role. And we also found that what a solution might be in one part of the country or for one local authority won't necessarily be the one for the other ones, for other places. And since then, we've had in-person events in London and in Leeds, a series of webinars, including one on funding solutions and MMC, a bank of case studies from different perspectives, and the latest CT brief, which you'll get after this webinar, focuses purely on temporary accommodation. And I think, Jonathan touched on it, but the situation really is a national disgrace. There are approximately 135,000 households in TA. That's more or less the size of Coventry. 64% of those households have got children. 104 children have died in temporary accommodation, 104. And in London, I'm sure this is replicated in other places, 1 in 20 children in schools are in temporary accommodation. So the impact on their educational attainment and future life chances is appalling for them and actually for society. And I don't really need to tell this audience about the financial costs to local authorities. We had an in-person event on Monday in London, and everyone talked about the importance of alignment and collaboration. One of the issues from non-local authority people that is mentioned regularly since we started this TAN is sometimes how difficult it can be liaising with local authorities, not knowing who can make the decisions and at what level they can make decisions. And there are loads of people who, in a local authority who have a role. Housing, be it supply or management, people working on housing options or homelessness. Children's social care, who often actually end up paying for TA because they have responsibilities under the Children's Act. Property services, legal, planning, and finance. Before I became a consultant, I worked on a local authority for many years, and one that had, in the noughties, we have 3,500 households in bed and breakfast. And we had to come up with all sorts of schemes to deal with that, and had to deal with all those departments. I often found actually the most receptive person in the local authority was a Section 151 officer. We're going to hear from one, I think, a bit later, who could assess the impact across all the council's finances. So we're going to hear about that. So we have 4 speakers to cover what we've got at the moment. We've got Samantha Grix from Devonshires, who set up TAN with me. And her focus is going to focus on literally the challenge of rent subsidies. And then we've got speakers from 3 different local authorities from different parts of the country. We've got Andrew Lee, who's the Director of Housing in Liverpool, a borough which hasn't got its own stock, which is a challenge in itself, and until a few years ago, didn't have much of a TA problem. And Andrew's going to talk about how they've managed to reduce the cost. We have Joanne Drew, who's the Executive Director of Housing and Regeneration at Enfield Council, and is also the Chair of the London Council's Housing Directors Group. Now, London has been grappling with the challenges of longer than most, and she's going to cover the whole council approach and the initiatives that both Enfield and London councils have done. And finally, we're going to have Hamira Javadi, who's the Director of Finance and Performance at Eastbourne and Lewis councils, who'll speak about how finance is driving the whole council approach. We're then going to have some time for questions and some summing up. So I'm now going to hand over to Samantha.
Thank you, Maggie. I'm just going to share my screen. Can you let me know if you are able to see?
We can see.
Brilliant. Thank you. Well, it's lovely to see so many people here. This is obviously a critical issue across the country. Maggie kindly introduced me. I'm a partner at Devonshires. Regulation is my background, social housing regulation, but this over time has sort of morphed into different things, and TA is one of the things that I spend quite a lot of my time now dealing with and advising local authorities and other interested parties, registered providers and others on subsidy maximization and structures of delivery for TA. So today I'm going to talk to you about subsidy, which seems to be something that I really talk about all the time. Maggie will be sick hearing me. So just a few stats on the cost, because you'll all be very familiar with this from your own organisations, but local authorities lost over 31.8 billion in TA costs over the last decade. That is a lot of money. Between 2019 and 2025, TA placements up 54%. Households with children up by 11% to over 83,000 children. And we know that there are obviously more chronic areas than others, but in London, we're now looking at 1 in 21, 1 in 20 children in London are in temporary accommodation, which is an eye-watering number. The subsidy gap's grown. There are more people in B&B over 6 weeks than they ever have been, but I do know, we do hear some really good stories, and Andrew can speak to this about a massive reduction in B&B use, and that's obviously the government's intention is to get rid of B&B use over 6 weeks as an option in the coming years. And spend has gone up. This is all stuff we know, but just by way of context, I think it's helpful for us to see some of the numbers. So in terms of subsidy, what's the issue? Well, we have the income-related benefits subsidy to authorities order 1998, nice and catchy. I'm going to call it the subsidy order, which essentially capped subsidy recovery rates for TA at 90% of 2011 LHA rates. At the time, that wasn't a bad amount to be receiving because it was current rates, but obviously over, we're now many years on from that point in time when the rates were capped, and that is causing a massive loss to local authorities. So we either have to make up the difference ourselves so we can recover a certain amount of subsidy and we top it up, or we have individuals going into arrears or using discretionary housing funds, whatever it is we are able to do to plug that gap. But whatever happens, if you're not able to recover it from central government, there is a loss there. So what I've been doing in the last sort of year or so is working with local authorities and others to work out, what does this subsidy order actually say? What does it actually limit? And what are the ways around this, if any? Now, these are the articles of the subsidy order. So they are very specific scenarios, and they will tell you what rate. I've put next to it the rate where there's no loophole. You can't get around it. If these specific scenarios occur, then you are going to be capped on the amount of subsidy that can be recovered. But there are ways around it, which a lot of local authorities and others have been looking at to maximise subsidy. And I put a health warning on all of this. Obviously, if we're finding ways around the specific wording, there's always a risk that it could be picked up on and those gaps are closed. But trying to maximise your income is not a bad thing. And given the situation that we're all dealing with, I think it's understandable. So there has been a lot of press in the last year, 2 years, about using 10 plus 1 year leases. This being because the subsidy order applies to sub 10-year leases. So if a local authority enters into a lease above 10 years, then technically the subsidy order doesn't apply, and therefore you can recover higher rates. But obviously there are considerations to think about with this, and something we were talking about on Monday at the TAN event was the overlay of different considerations. So one thing to think about with a 10 plus 1 year lease or longer is that is an ongoing liability. And so you need to think about whether you've got the appetite for that risk, whether that is a model that you're prepared to look at. And as I've said, the plus 10-year lease thing is something that's been in the press quite widely. But there are a few other things that I think you can think about to get around the subsidy order. The first is owning freehold, but then that makes it difficult because of HRA general fund for a local authority. The second is placement out of borough. So if the placing authority is different to the paying authority, then the subsidy cap doesn't apply. But placement out of borough is not ideal, and in some areas it's not really an option due to the size of a county or district. The other way around it would be to not to have a person nominate to a registered provider, and then the registered provider has to be a not-for-profit, then lets to them, but it's with more than minimal care support or supervision. So it's essentially exempt from housing benefit regs, and that means you can recover a higher rate because that support is being provided. Now, there will be some cohorts who need TA, who need support, but there will be some that don't. So that won't be an option because it might be a relationship breakdown, for example, and they just need somewhere to live. They're more than capable, but they just need somewhere to live for the time being. But the exempt model, I think, is something that is interesting because what I've heard from some TA providers who are working with local authorities is that the cohort they have, especially single people, it can be really, really time intensive in trying to support them to stay in their properties. And actually that might, the exempt way could be a better way to maximise that subsidy. So they're just a few things I wanted to just mention. I won't be much longer. The final thing to think about, which means that it's totally off your balance sheet, is the nomination model. So if you have a partner, RP partner, for example, who you can nominate to, then you can have a think about whether that would be an option for you in terms of a stream of properties, particularly if you're nominating to a private sector tenancy where it would be universal credit payment and not housing benefit as well. That's one way around it. Okay, so just finally from me, in terms of that, they're the sort of ways around the subsidy order, but we do need to think about other things because there are overlapping regulation and legislation. So the rent standard, will it apply if you're a registered provider and you're providing it yourself? Does the rent standard apply? Can you do what you want to do in accordance with that regulation? Your reasoning for placing it in the HRA or the general fund. Obviously, there are rules relating to accounting and where things sit, so you need to have a think about that. Appetite for long-term liability. This feeds into the 10 plus leases. And whether there are alternative strategies we can think about, i.e. intervention, supported placements, which I mentioned about the exempt housing benefit rates, whether you need to look at your criteria, and longer term housing strategies. Obviously, the ultimate aim is to have more permanent housing, but whether your TA strategy can also feed into that. So that's me. I will stop sharing and we can move to the next speaker.
Okay. Caitlin, has Joanne been able to join us? Not yet. Okay. Shall we go to Andrew? Are you ready? Give us a Liverpool story.
Yeah, I'm ready. Yeah, if I can just share my presentation, please. Just bear with me. Just sorry, I'm having problems in sharing my presentation. Sorry, it's ready to go, but just struggling with it.
Always a technology, isn't it?
Yeah. I'm not used to using Zoom. Okay, I can't. I'm struggling. Let me speak without my slides, and the slides I think will be in the pack, won't they?
They will. But she can share it on your behalf.
Okay, thank you. That'd be great. Okay, just a quick introduction. My name is Andrew Lee. I'm Director of Housing at Liverpool, so leading on a range of housing services. As Maggie has said, the one thing that I don't manage is an HRA because we have no housing stock owned by the city within the city. The only core city not to. So a little bit about Liverpool. So first slide, please. Thank you. Really brief. I mean, to say in terms of our context, homeless services in the city have been under-resourced and overwhelmed. We had 27 full-time equivalents for a city of 500,000 people. It was a very reactive service, very last minute, little time to do preventative work. We're using a lot of expensive bed and breakfast accommodation, and we had very, very poor data. Next slide, please. So we moved into a 3-year program, and we have a vision to make homelessness rare, brief, and non-recurring, but with a focus on preventing homelessness, reducing the need for and cost of temporary accommodation, and securing positive outcomes and move-on plans for those who need it. Next slide, please. This slide shows our 3-year program, our actual program on the page. Sorry, it's a lot of details. This huge piece of transformation with a lot of different activities. But the one thing I did want to just briefly talk about was we're talking about whole council approach, and I think it's really important when you're doing a significant transformation program to think about the enablers and dependencies within your program. And HR, legal, procurement, finance all have a significant role to play, and making sure that they are resourced, that they are ready to work at the pace you're working is a real challenge. And I think it's something to think about very carefully when you're doing the program of this sort of size, because if they haven't fully planned for it, it can slow the progress down. Next slide, please. This next slide just shows the governance structure. So we have a program board that reports through to a transformation board. So it's very much a whole council approach, a lot of interest, a lot of scrutiny from senior leaders within the council, but also members, the leader, and opposition as well. And when you're spending £35 million on temporary accommodation, absolutely, is the reason for that level of scrutiny. Next slide, please. So I think when I started, one of the things we had very little was data, and in the Campbell Tickell briefing that I wrote, I think I made reference to, we had so many spreadsheets, but they all said slightly different things. And actually, I really believe that having quality, timely data is absolutely key to getting a grip. So a lot of the slides I'm going to show you now are taken from our data pack. We have weekly meetings where we meet, we go through our data, we go through our performance. And this was work that we did initially with Cabinet Office as part of Test and Learn last January. Gave us some really significant surge capacity to develop this. And now we've moved on, we've got a lot of experience within the service. We've got a data analyst again within the service, and that's been part of the growth of the service. So again, just did some high levels, over 1,000 self-referrals a month. It's really significant numbers. Numbers of rough sleepers remain high. We've reduced the use of bed and breakfast, but conversely, we've been using a lot more self-contained accommodation, which has been positive, and which they slide on the far right shows. Next slide, please. So just going into a little bit more detail. So this is again taken from our data. So what we've been seeing here is that we think we've stabilised the total numbers in temporary accommodation. Very early days. We think it's impact of a number of interventions, which I'll come on to and speak a little bit later. But we've also increased the number of our staff significantly. So I talked about 27 FTEs when we started. Now got 105 FTEs. So really have grown the service, grown assessment and prevention officers, early intervention team, and a number of interventions again, which I'll go into a little bit more detail. I think our challenge for 26-27 is going to be reducing the numbers in temporary accommodation. I'll come on to that in a little bit more detail. But again, the slide on this graph on the left does show that you can see the number of bed and breakfast placements has been falling. The number of self-contained placements has been increasing, which has been part of our strategy around better quality temporary accommodation. Next slide, please. I think this is one we're probably one of the most proud of. So we had a significant hotel decant plan, which was moving households out of bed and breakfast, particularly families out of bed and breakfast, into self-contained. This time last year, we had 80 households with children in bed and breakfast for more than 6 weeks. The figure has been at 0 since the beginning of this year. And we also monitor 4 to 6 weeks, and the figure's been 0, again, 4 to 6 weeks, and the figure's been 0, again, for a considerable period of time as well. So what we're using is that better quality self-contained accommodation, which also is costing us less. So again, our costs, our nightly rate costs have come down from an average of £80 per unit per night. We're paying around £53 per unit per night. And again, that's through tough negotiations with providers and the team, and threatening to go elsewhere if they don't reduce costs. Next slide, please. I think has been referred to, the Section 151 officer, the financial impact of temporary accommodation is absolutely a high priority for the council. It's one of our sort of top 3 spends, along with children's and adults. So we've been given some really challenging financial targets, which have been modelled using a model we've got from EY, which takes into account the impact of interventions and the savings for TA. But you can see looking for significant savings over the next 3 years. And I'll talk a little bit more about those interventions over the next couple of slides. Next slide, please. So our work, this is looking at our work around assessments. So again, I think as a service, we were very poor. We were very poor at actually giving someone on a prevention duty. We were mainly relief duty. We were, again, going back to that earlier comment about responding too late. I think we had one of the worst percentage of cases in prevention in the Northwest, around about 18%. We're now at 47%. So a significant amount of work has gone on in that area. And in the line graph on the right, the numbers in relief are falling and the numbers in prevention are increasing. So again, some positive work, again, linked to the growth of the team, linked to processes, etc. Next slide, please. So again, absolutely prevention duty is important, but it's really about prevention outcomes, successful prevention outcomes. And again, we've been monitoring those and have seen some really positive signs in terms of increases in successful prevention outcomes. We know we've got to prevent homelessness. And actually, the sooner we can get in, the earlier interventions we can make, that prevents a household going into temporary accommodation, and ultimately it's better for that household, but also it's better for the local authority in terms of a cost-effective measure. Next slide, please. So this is looking, again, one of our initiatives is direct matching. So working with our RPs, 50% of all RP vacancies are being directly matched to households in temporary accommodation. And this, again, is monitored weekly through our monitoring meetings. So we're currently at 53%, which is good. I think it's been rather slower than we expected in terms of getting it started. It has been a challenge, but I think we are getting there. We're looking to extend it for a further year in terms of its impact. As I said, it definitely has stabilised numbers in temporary accommodation. Next slide, please. Just briefly, and again, as well as some of those interventions, we were looking at additional supply. So we've awarded an additional support contract, which will help to move singles out of expensive bed and breakfast accommodation into an environment where there will be a support for those individuals, and ultimately moving them through into permanent accommodation. And our final intervention, next slide please, is our TA and PRS move on. So we have recently let a new TA PRS move on contract, and this has got 2 aims. One is, again, better quality temporary accommodation, more cost effective. So again, driving down the rates of temporary accommodation rates further. But also really important for us is the supply of permanent homes. So 50% of the accommodation will ultimately be switched to PRS at local housing allowance rate over the life of the contract, and actually increasing the supply of affordable homes where we can discharge duty is one of our top priorities as well. So hopefully that's given you a sort of a steer of what we're doing in Liverpool. But as I said, happy to take any questions in the question and answer session. Thank you.
Great, thank you ever so much. Hamira, are you able to start now? Because we're going to hear from the finance person, which I always tell you can solve a lot of our problems, or not. You're on mute.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much indeed, Maggie. It's really helpful to listen to Samantha and Andrew's presentation, and I can clearly see so much overlap. And no matter how much time you spend on looking at some of these challenges, you can still learn from the work that is already being done by other authorities. And I'm encouraged to see there are some similarities in terms of the work that we have done in our authority as well. Before I start, I just wanted to kind of give you a little bit of a sort of, if you like, statistics on finance, and I know you love to hear numbers from me. So I am going to be covering about the cost of temporary accommodation, but temporary accommodation was only part of the financial challenges that Eastbourne Borough Council was faced with. So effectively, this was never going to be seen in isolation. So we had a sort of a more of a holistic approach to making sure that we are managing these challenges in a sort of takes a village format. But also in terms of chief finance officer, my role as a chief finance officer is not always about how much we spend, but are we actually spending money to secure good outcomes? And I think that's the part that I find most challenging and most sobering when it comes to temporary accommodation challenge. So in terms of our experience, as I said, we've never looked at temporary accommodation in isolation. It was part of our biggest sort of program at Eastbourne Borough Councils. The experience of temporary accommodations, it was just one critical factor. And it was very important for us to make sure that there are clear lines of connectivity between various aspects of the challenges that the council was faced with. So one of our biggest strengths to our plan was to make sure that we understand what's going on, we learn what are the driving forces and how to actively disrupt those patterns. Just to give you a little bit of a context, because this is really important, is the fact that we weren't exactly operating in calm seas before this kind of emerging pressure of temporary accommodation for the council. Eastbourne Borough Council was hit with an overnight £10 million loss of income in its cultural, hospitality and tourism income, and was forced to enter into government exceptional financial support arrangements. And as many of you know, that means that we had to borrow to pay for our day-to-day expenses. So this is the background, only a couple of short years before emerging pressures of temporary accommodation. So as we were just about to kind of see these kind of slow shoots of recovery, we were hit with this cost of human cost and financial cost of temporary accommodation. Our normal provision during any year would have been about 120 placements. Suddenly we saw this was driven into a kind of perfect storm scenario caused by private landlord exiting the market, neighbouring authorities placing their residents in Eastbourne, and local market not very supportive of the changes in universal credit, and also all in all, with a number of other factors, the demand rocketed to about 500 plus. Now, we on average, depending on as to the complexity of the placements, this could be anything like 10 to 26,000 pounds per placements per annum. So it's a substantial increase and substantial cost. So the net cost to Eastbourne Borough Council skyrocketed to about £5 million. And I think, Maggie, you already made references to that. 49, well, our case was 49p. Every pound of council tax was spent on temporary accommodation. And just to give you a little bit of a sort of, if you like, again, added context, is that we did a very simple calculation, and the cost of temporary accommodation was equal to building financing cost of building 250 affordable homes. So I think this is where the challenge for me comes to the fact that is not spending the money, but spending the money to secure better outcomes. So added to the sort of, if you like, aftermath of COVID and then these emerging pressures, and don't forget all the high inflationary environment that we were having to manage and plan for, that left the council with annual deficit, structural deficit of £7 million. And this is an authority with a net budget of £15.5 million. So this is a huge eye-watering and possibly at the time being seen as an impossible task for us to manage. Andrew, you mentioned that you had a program over 3 years, and we were quite aware that we had to come up with a sustainable plan, and that was never going to happen overnight. So we started to think about this in terms of, so what are the options, what are the preferred options for the council to secure? So faced with the crisis of this scale, this wasn't time for finance to stay in the back office and kind of just start reducing the budgets. We needed more of a holistic approach, and we started building our own little village to try and see who within the council and outside the council needed to be part of that program. So we brought people together from across entire authority in our partnership, our voluntary sector. We took our campaign to Westminster, so everything was on the table in order for us to make sure that we are raising the understanding of these pressures, not only in terms of finances, but in terms of human cost, and we are coming up with good solutions. So for us to make sure that we had clarity about what to plan for and how to deliver our plan, we needed a simple set of principles. My key principle was to avoid Section 114 at every cost, and that is because the authority was very clear that they didn't want to lose the control of their destiny. We had no appetite for piecemeal budget reductions year on year, sort of revisiting the same budget and reducing them a little bit more. There was no question that there wasn't a decision of giving priority to only statutory services, because for Eastbourne, discretionary services such as theatres, such as hospitality, such as tourism, were critically important, especially to the borough's economy. So protecting services was a key principle, and also the sort of final principle, having experienced the cost of exceptional financial support, we had no appetite to see exceptional financial support as a long-term solution. So we had a plan to exit exceptional financial support and pay back whatever we borrowed. So these were a clear set of principles, but very challenging to deliver. So we set out our program, and one aspect of that was reducing the demand or controlling the demand on temporary accommodation. And this is the part that I'm going to be focusing on for a few minutes. So we shifted our mindset fundamentally. We stopped treating TA as an uncontrollable phenomena and started treating it as a cycle we could actively disrupt. We broke the disruption down into 3 distinct data-driven phases. And Andrew, again, you seem to have applied the same approach in your program as well. First, we moved from reactive emergency response to an early intervention model by leveraging data analytics. Our finance and housing team pooled information to identify households showing early signs of financial stress, such as council tax arrears, tenancy instabilities long-term before eviction orders were served. We used the data to target and support early, but data only can get you through the door, and you needed people to actually sort of work with people who were in difficulties. We found that by sharing information, we had a better chance of, again, having early sighting of any vulnerabilities, that created a need for us to develop a housing hub and brought together our housing teams, people from social care or sort of specialist support together on the same roof. So actually they could share information and move away from working silo and use that information for intervention purposes. That kind of multi-agency plan was developed in real time. We extended our village to the voluntary sector, partnering with community groups such as Salvation Army and Matthew 25 Missions. They had community trust, and the council sometimes, which council sometimes was not quite there, enabling us to engage with landlords for mediation, debt restructuring, and targeted financial assistance to keep families, vulnerable families in their homes. The next phase was commercial agility and supply of taxes. Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, I'm sorry, I just coughed.
Oh, sorry, yes. So we changed how we manage supply. Spot purchasing, nightly emergency accommodation was creating extreme financial volatility. To fix this, we recruited housing professionals with private sector and agency experience, and bringing sharp, kind of financially minded commercial insight into the council. We approached struggling local private landlords not as regulators, but as practical business partners funding their essential property repairs in exchange for long-term fixed-rate lease arrangements. We introduced the dynamic purchasing system, again, Andrew, you made some references to that, to procure accommodations through single platform, securing block booking at competitive rates, and giving our finance team forecasting certainty. Concurrently, we audited our own commercial property portfolios, and where possible, we started repurposing underutilized council assets and landlord directly into traditional accommodation. Then the third aspect that we looked at asset efficiency. Every day council property sat empty was a day a vulnerable family remained in an expensive nightly paid bed and breakfast. We expanded contracted capacity, re-engineered our maintenance workflow, and drastically reduced our void turnaround times. We then cross-reference our placement portfolio with financial data to prioritize high-cost out-of-borrow cases first, moving them systematically into lower-cost block booking and permanent housing. Every move was calculated to maximize social and financial impact. So where did this collaborative village approach leave us? We kept controlled and stabilized the temporary accommodation demand curve. So as I mentioned, something that had been left unmanaged would have been at the region about 500 placements, is now stands at about 230. We have reduced the cost. We have now got a new norm, which we are now managing. We delivered a fully balanced budget, having achieved our £7 million structural deficit savings and a fully funded medium-term financial strategy. So, do we think this journey is ended? No, I think we also need to kind of make sure that government plays a key role in working with local authorities, because every prevention, every housing secures health, well-being of children and adults who are living in temporary accommodation. And that has got health benefit, social benefits, but also economic benefit. And I think it's false economy for us not to address the housing crisis at the earliest possible. So this is our journey and a very quick tour on what we've been trying to achieve. But also we are mindful that this is a very volatile market, and we are keeping a very close eye eye on monitoring and maintaining this new stabilized position. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Hamira. And I think you actually articulated exceptionally well how all parts of the council and your partners come together to try and address a whole range of, or attacking it from a whole range of different approaches, which is really, really important. Hamira, is there anything you wanted to add? I mean,
I think the only thing that I would add is that we are at a point where we need to keep all the options open, and just the significance of that data and understanding data, it's been really helpful to us. It kind of helps us to understand where the trigger points are and address them as quickly as possible. Working collaboratively has been significantly important to us, and also making sure that we do have a pool of officers working across different agencies and different authorities, so that we are sort of having a more holistic approach to a temporary accommodation crisis. I would, as the finance officer, I would see an immense benefit in government staying or being more engaged with local government and actually being part of this solution.
okay, so what doesn't come out of one public, it's all public money, isn't it? Whether it's central government or local.
It is, and also kind of understanding the long-term impact of poor housing on everything. So I think that's a compelling case for us to look into.
Okay, we've just got a minute left, so I think the sort of messages from here are obviously the interdependencies within a local authority, partnership and collaboration work with all your partners, so outside of it. The importance of data. I know the Cabinet Office actually parachuted a team of very bright young things into Liverpool to help them actually put together that data that needs. Actually spending more to save money, so all that, you know, the additional staff you've got, the importance of prevention. And I wouldn't also, we talked about the finance, but we haven't really touched on the supply side, trying to get new supply, the working with MMC, working with investment funds. There are solutions out there, and some of the stuff, and you'll get in the CT brief, you'll see some case studies. So I hope you found this informative and useful. I hope you'll actually join TAN. Provide us some case studies. Hamira, I'd like one from you, actually. I think the work you're doing is great in Eastbourne. I think that we can just keep talking to each other, because we'll find solutions. There won't be the same solution in every place, but there can be solutions. So I wanted to thank everybody for giving up an hour to join us today.
Thanks for having us.
Jonathan, do you want to add anything very end?
Just to echo those thanks, and to thank you, Maggie, for steering us so ably through a really complex but really fascinating and really important set of issues. So thank you, everyone.